NASCAR once found a race car with a fuel tank that held 5 extra gallons of gasoline. But here's the thing. The extra fuel wasn't in the tank. It was in the fuel line. And when officials pulled the tank out for inspection and it passed, the driver started the car without the tank and drove it back to his garage. That was just one of the tricks that made racing organizations completely rewrite their rule books. Today we're diving into 5 racing tricks so clever, so ingenious, that they had to be banned forever. I'm talking about acid-dipped bodies, disappearing weight, hidden horsepower, and engineering so smart it made officials question reality itself. This is the secret racing tricks NASCAR and NHRA tried to bury. Let's get into it. Trick number 5, the vanishing weight. Darrell Waltrip's buckshot Bertha. What the rule was. In NASCAR during the 1970s, race cars had to meet a minimum weight requirement before the race started. Officials would weigh every car during pre-race tech inspection to ensure nobody had an unfair advantage. The rule was simple. If your car weighed 3,700 pounds on the scale, you were legal. What happened after that? Well, NASCAR didn't check. They weighed cars before the race, not after. The clever workaround. Enter Gary Nelson, crew chief for DieGuard Racing and driver Darrell Waltrip. Nelson looked at that rulebook and saw an opportunity. In 1976, he went to a gun shop and bought bags and bags of lead buckshot, the same pellets you'd load into a shotgun shell. Then he got creative. The team's 1974 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, affectionately nicknamed Big Bertha, had a stock Chevrolet frame with hollow frame rails. Nelson removed the battery from behind the left front wheel, jacked the car's front end as high as it would go, and poured 75 to 100 pounds of buckshot through a funnel straight into the left side frame rail. The car would easily pass inspection at the minimum weight, but here's where it gets genius. Nelson designed a special release system. Where the jack post sat, the tube used to lift the car during pit stops, he installed a cap that Waltrip could loosen from inside the cockpit with just half a turn. Once the race started and the car was on the pace laps, Waltrip would twist that cap. The plug would fall out, and all that buckshot would slowly roll out through the hollow jack post and scatter across the track. How it worked technically. The buckshot didn't rush out in one big dump. It took a couple of pace laps for all 75 to 100 pounds to drain completely. Because the pellets were small and the color of asphalt, they were nearly invisible on the track surface. Losing that much weight during a race gave Waltrip a significant advantage in handling, acceleration, and tire wear, especially on short tracks where every pound matters. The system was virtually undetectable. The car passed tech inspection legitimately, and once the buckshot was gone, there was no evidence it had ever been there. When they got caught, the buckshot trick worked flawlessly for years, until one fateful night race at Bristol Motor Speedway in 1978. According to Gary Nelson's confession decades later, on Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s podcast, Darrell Waltrip made a critical mistake. He turned the cap only half a turn less than he should have. Instead of the buckshot draining during the pace laps as planned, nothing came out. Then, on the first pit stop, when the crew dropped the jack, the plug finally came loose. Right there on pit road, in full view of other teams and NASCAR officials, buckshot started pouring out like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. Nelson's crew panicked and started sweeping, but Nelson stopped them immediately. "Stop! You're sweeping up a dry pit road!" he shouted. He instructed just one guy to casually sweep it up, trying not to draw attention. But the damage was done. Junior Johnson's crew, whose pit stall was right next door, saw the whole thing. NASCAR officials, led by Chip Warren, launched an investigation. The trail of evidence was impossible to hide. What rule change it caused? After the Bristol incident, NASCAR implemented post-race weight checks and began inspecting frame rails more thoroughly. Teams could no longer simply meet the minimum weight before a race and then shed pounds once they were on track. The buckshot trick forced NASCAR to close a loophole they hadn't even known existed. Gary Nelson, by the way, he later became NASCAR's Cup Series director, essentially the chief law enforcement official. The guy who cheated the system ended up running it. Performance gains? Losing 75 to 100 pounds mid-race was massive. For perspective, that's like ejecting a full-grown person from the car. The weight reduction improved cornering speed, reduced tire wear, and allowed for faster acceleration. On a short track like Bristol, where races can be won or lost by hundredths of a second per lap, this advantage was worth multiple car lengths over a race distance. Trick number 4, the hidden power boost. Nitrous oxide at the 1976 Daytona 500. What the rule was: nitrous oxide, laughing gas to your dentist, rocket fuel to racers, has always been illegal in NASCAR. The rulebook explicitly banned fuel additives and performance-enhancing substances, but in the mid-1970s, enforcement was, shall we say, relaxed. Tech inspection was nowhere near as sophisticated as it is today, and hiding a small nitrous system on a race car wasn't exactly difficult. Nitrous oxide works by increasing the oxygen content in the combustion chamber, allowing the engine to burn more fuel and produce significantly more power. On a big naturally aspirated V8 like those used in 1970s stock cars, nitrous could add 100 to 150 horsepower in short bursts. The catch? Nitrous bottles deplete quickly, so you couldn't use it for an entire race. But for qualifying, perfect. The clever workaround. By 1976, nitrous oxide was NASCAR's worst-kept secret. Teams would hide small pressure vessels somewhere on the car, inside roll bars, tucked behind panels, wherever, with a hidden tube feeding the oxygen-rich gas into the intake manifold. It was easy to conceal and incredibly effective. Then came qualifying for the 1976 Daytona 500. Two cars suddenly jumped to the front of the speed charts: A.J. Foyt in the number 28, Haas Ellington Chevrolet, and Darrell Waltrip in the number 88 Die-Guard Racing Chevy. Both drivers had been mediocre in practice, but when it mattered, they were suddenly a full second faster than they'd been running all week. NASCAR headquarters raised an eyebrow. Big Bill France himself confronted Mario Rossi, Waltrip's crew chief, and told him in no uncertain terms that they would cut the car into tiny sections until they found the nitrous system. Rossi confessed immediately and revealed the system's location: hidden inside a chassis tube. Foyt's team had done the same thing. How it worked technically? The nitrous systems these teams used were remarkably simple. A small pressure bottle, maybe the size of a fire extinguisher, was mounted somewhere inconspicuous. A line ran from the bottle to a solenoid valve, which the driver could activate with a button or switch. When activated, the nitrous would flow into the intake manifold, dramatically increasing the engine's oxygen supply. More oxygen means more fuel can be burned, which means more power. The beauty of nitrous is that it's only active when you want it. For qualifying, drivers could hit the button on the straightaways and gain 100 to 150 horsepower instantly. That's the difference between starting on the front row and starting in the middle of the pack. When they got caught, what gave them away was simple. They were too fast, too suddenly. When you're running one speed in practice and then magically find a full second in qualifying, people notice. In what seems laughably lenient by modern standards, both teams were fined just $1,000 each and had their qualifying times disallowed. Dave Marcis was also caught up in the scandal. His car was disqualified not for nitrous, but for a movable aerodynamic device on the radiator. Basically, a trick shutter system that would close off airflow to reduce drag. What rule change it caused? The 1976 Daytona 500 nitrous scandal was a wake-up call for NASCAR. The governing body tightened tech inspection procedures dramatically. They started looking for hidden systems, checking chassis tubes, and scrutinizing cars more carefully. The penalties also got much stiffer. Today, if you're caught with nitrous oxide in a NASCAR vehicle, you're looking at massive fines, suspensions, and potentially a lifetime ban. Performance gains. A 100 to 150 horsepower boost on a qualifying lap at Daytona is enormous. For context, that's roughly a 20 to 25% power increase on an engine making around 600 horsepower. That translates to a gain of several miles per hour on the straightaways, which over a 2.5-mile lap at Daytona could easily be worth a full second or more. The difference between starting on the pole and starting 20th. The craziest part? After Foyt, Waltrip, and Marcis were disqualified, the front row of the 1976 Daytona 500 consisted of two independent drivers nobody had ever heard of, Ramo Stott and Terry Ryan. It remains one of the most obscure front rows in Daytona 500 history. Trick number 3, the acid bath. Mark Donohue's lightweight Camaro. What the rule was. In the 1960s, the SCCA Trans Am series was designed to feature mildly modified production-based race cars. The rules stated that cars had to maintain their stock body panels and original dimensions. The idea was showroom stock, cars that looked like what you could buy at a dealership, just with racing modifications like roll cages, better suspension, and racing engines. Weight was also regulated, but there were no specific rules about how thin body panels could be or what processes teams could use to prepare them. That loophole was all Roger Penske and Mark Donohue needed. The clever workaround. After Donohue crashed their first 1967 Camaro at the Briar, New Hampshire Trans Am race, the Penske team learned that other teams were having their cars acid-dipped at Lockheed Aerospace in California. The acid dipping process, also called chemical milling, involves submerging metal components in a bath of acid that eats away material uniformly, thinning the metal without changing its shape. Penske immediately had their second Camaro, the second Z28 ever built off the production line, acid dipped at Lockheed. The process removed an astonishing 370 pounds from the car's curb weight, dropping it from 2,950 pounds down to 2,580 pounds. For perspective, that's like removing 2 full-grown adults from the vehicle. But here's the problem. The acid bath made the body so thin that you could push dimples into the fenders with your fingers. The car's structural rigidity was compromised to the point that it became dangerously flexible, like a 15-foot roll of aluminum foil, as one observer described it. Donohue, who had to actually drive the thing, became genuinely alarmed. His solution? Install a NASCAR-style full roll cage, one of the first ever seen in sports car racing. The roll cage effectively became the car's frame, providing the structural support that the thinned body panels no longer could. How it worked? Technically, acid dipping works by immersing metal in an acid bath, typically hydrochloric or sulfuric acid. The acid etches away material uniformly from all surfaces. How much material you remove depends on how long you leave the metal in the bath. A properly executed acid dip can reduce panel thickness by 30 to 40% without affecting the panel's shape or profile. The advantage is massive. Every pound removed from a race car improves acceleration, braking, cornering, and tire wear. Removing 370 pounds was like installing a second engine in terms of performance gain. The downside? The car became frighteningly fragile. Body panels were so thin they'd flex under aerodynamic load. The doors could be dented by pressing on them. But with the roll cage installed, the car was structurally sound enough to race and fast enough to dominate. When they got caught, The lightweight Camaro won 2 Trans Am races in 1967 at Las Vegas and Seattle. After the September race at Crow's Landing in Modesto, California, SCCA tech inspectors finally examined the car closely. When they discovered the paper-thin body panels, they declared the car illegal and banned it from competition forever. Penske's response? Pure audacity. At the 1968 Sebring 12 Hours, Penske entered 2 Camaros, a legal 1968 model and the banned lightweight, disguised with 1968 grille and taillights. To get the lightweight through tech inspection, they created identical number roundels that could be swapped between the 2 cars. First, the legal car went through inspection. Then, back in the garage, the crew swapped the numbers and sent the same legal car through inspection again, but with the lightweight's numbers. Once approved, they swapped the numbers back, and the lightweight went out for qualifying and the race. The subterfuge worked perfectly. The lightweight won its class and finished 3rd overall, ahead of factory Ford GT40s. What rule change it caused? The SCCA immediately banned acid dipping and implemented minimum thickness requirements for body panels. They also began using calipers to measure panel thickness during tech inspection. The Trans Am series instituted strict rules about material removal processes, and teams were required to prove that body panels met minimum specifications. Acid dipping became a cautionary tale in motorsports, a reminder that if a rule doesn't explicitly forbid something, someone will try it. Performance gains. Removing 370 pounds from a 2,950-pound car is a 12.5% reduction in total weight. In racing terms, that's absolutely massive. The lightweight was reportedly 1.5 seconds per lap faster than Penske's legal 3,000-pound Camaro on the same track. Over a 12-hour endurance race, that advantage compounds into lap after lap of dominance. Mark Donohue went on to win the 1968 Trans Am Championship, scoring 10 wins in 13 races, including 8 consecutive victories. The lightweight Camaro played a role in that success, even though it was technically banned for most of the season. Trick number 2, the invisible fuel tank. Smokey Yunick's 11-foot fuel line. What the rule was, NASCAR regulations in the 1960s specified the maximum size for a race car's fuel tank, typically 22 gallons. The idea was to level the playing field and force everyone to make roughly the same number of pit stops. More fuel capacity meant fewer stops, and fewer stops meant more time on the track at racing speed. But here's what the rulebook didn't say. It made no mention of how big the fuel line could be, the tube that carries fuel from the tank to the carburetor. The clever workaround. Smokey Yunick, NASCAR's most notorious rule bender, spotted that loophole immediately. If NASCAR wouldn't let him have a bigger fuel tank, he'd simply make the fuel line itself into a fuel reservoir. Yunick installed an 11-foot-long fuel line with a 2-inch inner diameter running from the fuel tank to the engine. To put that in perspective, a normal fuel line might be 3 or 4 feet long and half an inch in diameter. Yunick's fuel line was essentially a second fuel tank, and it held an additional 5 gallons of gasoline. The genius was in the execution. The fuel line snaked all over the car, through the frame rails, around the roll cage, wherever there was space. It looked complex and purposeful, like part of the car's cooling system, or maybe a hydraulic line for something. Nobody thought to question it. How it worked, technically. A tube with a 2-inch diameter and 11 feet of length has a volume of about 2.6 cubic feet. 1 gallon equals 0.133 cubic feet, so 2.6 cubic feet is roughly 5 gallons. That's 5 extra gallons that NASCAR never accounted for. In a race where fuel mileage determines strategy, 5 extra gallons is the difference between making 1 fewer pit stop than your competitors. At a track like Darlington or Charlotte, saving 1 pit stop which takes 15 to 20 seconds, can mean the difference between winning and finishing mid-pack. The other brilliant part? The fuel line was completely legal. It passed every inspection because technically, the fuel tank itself was regulation size. Nobody thought to measure the fuel line. When they got caught, or did they? The most famous story about Smokey's fuel line has become legendary in NASCAR circles. According to the tale, NASCAR officials became suspicious after Yunick's car kept getting mysteriously good fuel mileage. They pulled the car into the inspection area and removed the fuel tank for a thorough check. The tank itself was legal, exactly 22 gallons. At this point, Smokey supposedly started the car, which had no fuel tank installed, and told the officials, better make it 10, before driving the car back to his garage in Daytona Beach on the fuel still in that massive fuel line. Here's the thing. Smokey himself later said that story wasn't entirely true. He admitted the car could have technically run without the tank for a short distance because of the fuel in the line, but he didn't actually drive it all the way back to the shop. Still, the fact that the story is plausible tells you everything about how clever the system was. NASCAR did eventually catch on and inspect the fuel line. Once they realized what Smokey had secretly done, they quickly added language to the rulebook specifying maximum fuel line dimensions. What rule change it caused? After Smokey's fuel line trick, NASCAR rewrote the rules to specify not just fuel tank capacity, but also fuel line diameter and length. Modern NASCAR rules are incredibly specific about every component of the fuel system, down to the type of fittings and materials that can be used. Smokey also tried other fuel-related tricks. He allegedly installed a basketball inside the fuel tank, inflated it during inspection to displace volume, then deflated it before the race to fit more fuel. NASCAR banned that too, once they figured it out. Performance gains. 5 extra gallons of fuel translates directly into strategy advantages. In a 500-mile race where cars average 4 miles per gallon, 5 gallons is worth 20 miles of racing. That could easily be the difference between pitting one fewer time than your competitors, which saves 15 to 20 seconds. Over the course of a race, that advantage can put you in victory lane. Smokey Yunick won 57 NASCAR Cup Series races as a crew chief and engine builder. His teams earned 2 championships, and while not every victory came from bending the rules, his willingness to find loopholes made him one of the most feared and respected minds in the garage. Trick number 1. The incredible shrinking Chevelle. Smokey Yunick's 7/8 scale, or was it? What the rule was. In NASCAR's early years, stock cars were supposed to be exactly that, stock. The body had to match the production car's dimensions precisely. You could modify the engine, suspension, and interior, but the exterior had to look like something you could buy from a Chevrolet dealership. By the mid-1960s, NASCAR started using templates, metal or wooden frames, that matched the production car's profile. If your car fit inside the template, you were legal. If it didn't, you failed inspection. The clever workaround. In 1966, Smokey Yunick built a Chevrolet Chevelle for driver Curtis Turner that became the stuff of legend. During testing, the car was absurdly fast, so much faster than the competition that rivals immediately accused Smokey of cheating. The car's profile looked stock, but something was clearly different. The legend that grew around this car is that Smokey built it as a 7/8 scale replica of a production Chevelle, every dimension reduced by 12.5%. A smaller car means less frontal area, less drag, and better weight distribution. It would be a brilliant, brazen cheat. Here's the truth. The 7/8 scale story is almost certainly a myth. Smokey himself debunked it in his autobiography and in a 1987 Circle Track magazine article. A car that was truly 7/8 scale would be roughly the size of a Chevy Vega, something even a casual observer would notice immediately. What Smokey actually did was far more subtle and far more clever. How it worked, technically, Smokey made a series of small modifications that added up to a huge advantage. First, he moved the entire body back on the chassis by about 2 inches. This shifted the aerodynamic center of pressure rearward and improved weight distribution, critical for handling on NASCAR's oval tracks. Second, he lowered the roof slightly and raised the floor. This reduced the car's profile and lowered the center of gravity, without changing the external dimensions enough to be obvious. Third, he offset the chassis to the left. NASCAR rules said the engine had to be centered between the frame rails, but they didn't say where the frame rails had to be in relation to the body. By shifting everything left, Smokey improved weight distribution for the left-hand-only turns of oval racing. Fourth, he narrowed the bumpers, smoothed the floor pan, and repositioned components for better aerodynamics. He even moved the driver farther left and back in the car to optimize weight placement. Every single modification taken individually was either within the letter of the rules or in an area the rules didn't address. But together, they created a car that was faster than anything else on the track. When they got caught, Curtis Turner took the Chevelle to Daytona in 1967 and qualified on the pole for the Daytona 500. The car passed tech inspection, barely. NASCAR officials knew something was off, but they couldn't figure out what. Then Turner crashed the car at Atlanta later that season. When NASCAR officials finally got to examine it closely during the rebuild, they discovered all of Smokey's modifications: the offset chassis, the repositioned body, the aerodynamic tricks. None of it was explicitly illegal, but all of it violated the spirit of the rules. NASCAR declared the car illegal and banned it from competition. They also implemented new rules requiring cars to fit precise templates for the roof, hood, and trunk. If your car didn't match the template, you didn't race. Smokey built a second Chevelle for the 1968 Daytona 500, but NASCAR rejected it during inspection. That car never turned a competitive lap. What rule change it caused? The Yunick Chevelle forced NASCAR to completely overhaul how they enforced body specifications. They created detailed templates for every body panel and checked cars against them during every inspection. The rules became far more specific about where components could be located relative to the body and chassis. Modern NASCAR tech inspection uses laser scanners and digital templates to ensure every car matches specifications to within thousandths of an inch. That level of scrutiny exists largely because of cars, like Smokey's Chevelle. Performance gains. The Chevelle's modifications resulted in dramatically reduced aerodynamic drag and improved cornering capability. Contemporary accounts suggest the car was several miles per hour faster on the straightaways than comparable vehicles. At Daytona, that translates to multiple car lengths per lap, an insurmountable advantage. More importantly, the car handled better. Smokey's weight distribution changes and chassis offset gave Turner better grip in the corners, which meant higher cornering speeds and less tire wear. Curtis Turner won the pole at Daytona, driving a car that was technically illegal, but had passed inspection. That's the ultimate testament to Smokey Yunick's genius. So there you have it. 5 racing tricks so clever that NASCAR and other sanctioning bodies had to ban them forever. From disappearing weight to hidden horsepower, from acid-dipped bodies to invisible fuel tanks, and from offset chassis to the legendary Chevelle that may or may not have been a scale model, these innovations changed motorsports forever. What's fascinating is that none of these teams saw themselves as cheaters. They saw themselves as engineers, finding advantages in areas the rulebook hadn't addressed yet. Smokey Yunick famously said, "There are 2 types of racers, cheaters and losers." His point? If the rules don't explicitly forbid it, it's fair game. Today's racing is different. Technology has made it nearly impossible to hide these kinds of tricks. Laser scanners, digital templates, post-race teardowns, and sophisticated tech inspections catch everything. The days of driving away without a fuel tank or dumping buckshot on the track are long gone. But that doesn't mean teams have stopped trying. They've just gotten more creative. The game of cat and mouse between racers and officials continues. It's just moved into software, aerodynamics, and materials science instead of hidden fuel lines and acid baths. Which trick did you think was the most genius? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more stories about racing's most legendary rule benders, let me know and I'll dig into even more wild innovations that change the sport forever. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more racing history and technical breakdowns. I'll see you in the next one.